We continue now at the top of Daf Tzadi Zayin Amud Beis in Maseches Zvachim. This is Zvachim Daf 97b. The Gemara is in the middle of bringing a Braisa which discusses the pasuk. We'll read the full pasuk. Kol asher yiga b'vesara yikdash. Anything that touches its meat. This is talking about the meat of a carbon chatos. Then yikdash, it will become holy. Again, we'll see the Braisa in a moment, which will discuss what this pasuk means. The pasuk continues. V'asher yiza midama al habeged asher yiza oleh techabes b'makam kadosh. If the blood of the chatos gets on a garment, then that garment has to be washed, and that was discussed earlier. And the Braisa now continues and says, Ad sheyivla bivsar, it's not simply enough that it touches, it has to be absorbed from the meat. If there's absorption, then that which absorbs from the chatos is going to be yikdash. We'll see what that means in a moment. Now, yachol naga b'mixas chaticha yehekulo pasel. One might think, let's say it touches just part of the cut of meat, that the entire piece of meat is now going to be disqualified. Talmud lomar yiga, the pasuk says yiga, hanogeya pasel, the part which touches is disqualified. Haketzad haso choteches makam shabala, he cuts away the area which absorbed from the chatas. That area of the meat which actually absorbed from the chatas is what becomes disqualified. And the Braisa continues, bivsar, it says it has to touch the meat of the carbon chatas. Velo begidin, velo ba'atzamas, velo bekarnayim, velo betlafayim. This does not apply if it touches the sinews or the bones or the horns or the hooves of the chatas. And finally it says in the pasuk, yikdash, it becomes holy. What does that mean? It means lios kamo, it means the piece of meat that touched the chatos gets the same status as that chatos. Haketzad, how so? In psulahi, if the chatos was disqualified tipasel, then that piece of meat is disqualified. V'im kasheri, and if it's kosher, then tochal kechamer shabah, then that piece of meat has to be eaten according to the stringencies of the chatos. And Rashi explains, ad sheyivla has to absorb, kegon hamahasech shuman chatos v'soch mimenu tzli shel shlamim. For example, let's say a person melts the fat of the chatos and then smears it onto the roasted part of the shlamim. V'nivlabo, it becomes absorbed in the shlamim. Umikan anu lemeidim, and Rashi says from here we learn heter mitzdarif leisur b'kachim, the idea of heter combining with isur by kachim. What that means is, let's say a person now eats a kazayis from that shlamim which absorbs from the chatos, it's like eating a kazayis of the chatos. Vein lilmod mikan tam keikar, Rashi says you should not learn from here the principle of tam keikar, that when something absorbs the taste, that's like the item itself. She'ein zetam, because this is not a case of imparting taste. Elamamish, this is actual substance that is going into the shlamim, and therefore again it's a situation of heter mitzdaref leisur. And then the Braisa said tochal kechomer shabah, if it's not possible, but then you have to follow the rules of what it absorbed. Shareish ba'achshav shnei minin, you now have two different types here. Ukechomer shebeshneim teachal, it has to be eaten according to the stricter one. And the Gemara continues and asks, Amai, but why is this the case? Rashi says, Amai tipasel, why should the shlamim, let's say, become disqualified, mishum hai porsa, because of this little amount that it absorbed? Why should that be true? V'nesi aseh, because the positive commandment of eating it, there's a positive commandment to eat the carbon, that should come. V'lidchias los aseh, and it should push off the los aseh of not eating what is disqualified. Rashi says, Nesi aseh diva'achlu osam diksheira, it says to eat them, that's of the kosher carbon. V'lidchi los aseh de los ochal, that should push off the los aseh not to eat the psula of the disqualified one. V'yavagav de'ika los aseh b'achilas psulin kedamrina mipsachim. Now, even though there is a los aseh when it comes to the eating of disqualified, like we say in psachim b'chol shah, kol shebekodesh pasel ba'akasav v'litein los aseh al achilas. So again, that there is a los aseh there, but still the aseh should push off that los aseh. That's the question of the Gemara. And the Gemara continues and says, Amar Rava says, Ein aseh doches los aseh shebemikdash. In the Beis HaMikdash, an aseh is not doche los aseh, and that's why we don't say aseh doche los aseh. And how do we know that? Shenemar, like it says in the pasuk, v'etzem los ishberubo, it says that you can't break the bone of the carbon pesach. Rabbi Shimon ben Menashe Omer, Rabbi Shimon ben Menashe says, echod etzem sheyesh bo moach, that's whether the etzem has moach, whether the etzem has marrow, which is supposed to be eaten, v'echod etzem she'ein bo moach, and whether the bone does not have marrow. And so there also, why is that the case? Nesi aseh v'lidchias los aseh. If it has marrow, so there's an aseh, a positive commandment to eat that marrow, and it should push off the los aseh. Ella, rather, it must be ein aseh docha los aseh shebemikdash. An aseh is not docha los aseh when we're talking in the Beis HaMikdash. Rashi explains, Nesi aseh v'lidchi, let the aseh push it off. Nesi aseh da'achilas moach, the aseh of eating the marrow should come along. The Siv, it's written, v'yochlu es habasar b'layla hazeh, they eat the meat of the carbon pesach on this night. and the asay should be docha los asay, but it must be ein asay docha los asay shabim mikdash. And the Gemara continues and gives another answer. Rav Ashi says, Yiktash asehu. Actually, the word Yiktash is an asay. And so therefore you have an asay and a los asay. V'yein asay doches los asay v'asay. And asay is not going to be docha, both a los asay. Again, the los asay is because it's disqualified. And then you have the asay of Yiktash. So the asay to actually eat what is kosher will not push off the los asay and the asay. And the Gemara continues, Eshkechon chatos de miskadesh bevalua. So now we have a pasuk, we have a source. We find by chatos that you have this din of yikdash by absorption. But shar kachim and olan, how do we know this halach applies by other kachim? Amar Shmuel mishum Rebbe Lazar. Shmuel says in the name of Rebbe Lazar, Zos haTorah la'ola v'lamincha v'lachatos u'la'asham v'lamiluim u'lezevach hashlamim. We compare all of the karbanos as follows. La'ola we compare to ola. Ki ola, just like an ola. Ma'ola to unakli, just like an ola requires a vessel. Afkal to unakli, so to all, they require a vessel. The Gemara says, my kli, what kind of vessel are we talking about here? Ilema mizrak, if you're going to say it's the basin that receives the blood. But b'shal meitzibor namiksiv behu, by a communal shlama, it also says to receive the blood in a basin. It says, vayikach Moshe chatzi hadam vayasam baganos. It says Moshe took half the blood and he placed it in the basins. So ela desak, and rather the reference over here is to a knife. It's saying that all the karbanos require slaughtering with a knife. Viola gufa minolan, and the ola itself, where do we know that it has to be slaughtered with a knife? Dechsiv, as it's written, vayishlach Avram es yado vayikach es. It says Avram, he took the macheles, he took the knife. V'hasam ola, and over there in the pasuk by Avram, it was an ola. Dechsiv, as it's written in the pasuk, vayaleu liola tachas beno. He brought it, he offered it up as an ola instead of his son. And mincha, what's the comparison to mincha? Ma mincha eina nechelas ela lezichrei kahuna, just like mincha is only eaten by male kohanim. Afkol einam necholin ela lezichrei kahuna. So to all of them, they're eaten only by male kohanim. The Gemara says, Mahi, what are we talking about? Ichatos v'yasham, if you're talking chatos and asham, behed yaksibahu, there it already is written that. It says, kol zocher ba kohanim yochlenu, it says the male kohanim eat it. V'shal meitzibur, and if you're talking about shal meitzibur, me ribuya dekrasi, that's learned from the inclusion in the pasuk, Kodesh HaKodashim Tochlenu Kol Zocher Yochaloso. It says all males eat it. Limed al Shal Meitzibur. That teaches about Shal Meitzibur. She'enu Nechol and Ela Lezichrei Kuna. That's only eaten by male Kohanim. And the Gemara continues, Tanoi, it's a machlokas Tanoim. Rashi explains, Zos HaTorah hukshu kulon zelazeh. This pasuk of Zos HaTorah, they're all being compared to one another. Lilmod ze'al zeh, they're learning one from the other. Lakach hukshu kulon la'ola. So for the following reason, they're all compared to Ola, Dema Ola to Una. Again, just like Ola requires a vessel. And then the Gemara said, he named a mizrak, what kind of vessel? If you're going to say a basin, lekabolas dam, to receive the blood, v'yolef me Ola Sinai, which will be learned from the Ola at Har Sinai. T'chsiv vayishlach esnare b'nei Yisrael, t'chsiv Ola hasam, it's written Ola over there. But again, it says vayasam ba'agonos. It says that by the Shalmei Tzibur. V'kevan dohader iskish kulo l'shlamim, and since they're again compared to shlamim, t'chsiv b'haikra, which is written in that pasuk, v'alfinan mino lekaman b'shmaitin, and we're going to learn from there later on in the sugya, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Tzadi Ches Amud Aleph.